What's up, bro? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to another conversation, the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with my next guest because so much is happening with the environment. You know how I feel about environment. I feel, you've heard me talk about National Geographic and the equities of trees. You know how I feel about the climate change. I want to talk about it from the perspective of farming and the patterns and how it's changing agriculture. You know how I've even talked about it, like with the idea of environmental justice and how we've been framing environmental and the environment and climate change in such a one-sided silo base. For me, I like to include environmental justice because that to me is what will get me going about climate change. I think we've always roped it around plastic green straws and polar bears, but it's so much more to that, which is why I think a lot of us have been kind of opting out the climate change and climate conversation. And so today I want to do some more of a deep dive into climate change because we have been here on the Northeast, have had an incredible run with Hurricane Ida. I'm very mindful about that too as well. Our experience with Ida is much different than those who are struggling and suffering with, Ida, like in Louisiana and other areas. But nonetheless, we experienced it. We had unfortunate deaths that occurred, and it hit us like a downpour, literally and figuratively, within an hour. And New York City doesn't have the infrastructure to handle these type of reoccurring events. So it's only going to exacerbate this. But I believe it's due to climate change that we're seeing these events. Just 2 weeks ago, we had our concert here in Central Park that we had to cancel with 60,000 people on the Great Lawn because of the fact of the way the rain and downpouring was coming. And so the climate patterns are changing here within New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut and the Northeast. And so I just think that it was something that I really wanted to have a conversation around because I, a non-environmental scientist, believe that it's all due to climate change. We see what's happening with the wildfires, the wildfires in Lake Tahoe, which is like this perfect, beautiful vacation destination. I haven't even got to Lake Tahoe yet, right? And it's already changing. And I was like, But then we see what's happening in California, just nonstop fires, like every day, it seems like. And I'm like, yo, something is going on here. I'm from Lansing, Michigan, as you guys all know. I was talking with my homie in Detroit, and he was even saying how much the climate is changing, how the rain is just unusual for that part of Detroit. And so I brought an expert who can determine whether or not my random hypothesis is correct. I think this is about climate change. So we always say that, but I wanted to bring a scientist on to really talk to us about climate change and just the impact of Ida that happened here just a couple of days ago. She's brilliant. She's a friend. I think she is a genius, beyond a genius. And she has a street cred to prove it because she has a PhD. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I want to welcome to the Mike Muse Show, Dr. Crystal Upperman, who is the Vice President of ESG Social Performance and Resilience. I know that sounds really super smart. I don't even know what that means. Don't worry about that. I don't know neither. But she has a PhD in environmental science. So there that is. That's a street cred for University of Maryland College Park. Dr. Upperman, what's happening?
Hi, Mike. Well, things are definitely really, really intense these days, but happy to be here to chat with you and your audience members and share a little bit more about just like this whole issue of climate change. Why are we seeing what we're seeing happening for sure? But definitely happy to share a little bit about myself. Definitely, as Mike mentioned, Crystal Upperman. I've been in this environmental field since the age of 15. I was one of those folks that discovered this and wanted it to be my life's passion. And what really stood out to me was just the differences in lived experiences. I grew up in a Caribbean island and then moved to Newark, New Jersey. And you're talking about going from engaging with nature to not having nature accessible. And that's what drove me and put me in the position to want to change the way in which people live in communities. When you talk about environmental justice, we're talking about the built environment. How do people, what is accessible to folks and how that actually impacts their health? And that has a lot of connectedness to why we're experiencing what we're experiencing in terms of climate change, heavy downpours, and also extreme heat.
Well, Chris, I want to go there with you as well, because audience, you're listening obviously right now on this great, beautiful Sunday morning. So thank you guys for tuning in. But I encourage you tomorrow morning to go to my YouTube page at I Am Mike Muse so you can actually see Dr. Upperman. She is a Black female. And the reason that's important for me to note is because we don't really see Black faces in this space of climate change. It is something that usually is presented from a white space, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not making this about race at all. But that is why I'm also too excited for the head of the Environmental Protection Agency is a Black man, because I really feel now that we can rope in environmental justice to the conversation from an identity perspective of knowing and awareness. Crystal, I know you mentioned like going from nature to no nature. Environment and climate was such a, that was a couple of years ago. I don't want to date you and give your age, but that was a little while ago, right? And so it wasn't trendy. So like, how did you gravitate towards climate? I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, it's never been something I've been advocating for. It's not one of my top pillars. So how did it become your top pillar?
Mike, it goes back to the Bible. God gave us this green earth and he put us as stewards of it. And it's our responsibility to protect it. And I saw early on in my formative years that people were just not respectful to the earth. And that ties closely to a lot of the tenets that Indigenous populations have. It may just be directly tied to the roots. We come from a generation of folks who, a lineage that tilled the earth. And I just have to say, it was just something that was deep within me. I'm not sure how it was passed down, but it was God ordained, to be honest with you. But then the fact that in the communities that I grew up in, I don't see folks having, community gardens. There's a paucity of community gardens. There's a paucity of, fruit bearing trees. There's paucity of just access to lush neighborhoods, places to play, parks, all of that. And then, there are certain areas in other communities where there was access to nature, trees were abundant. And those were just conundrums to me at that point in time. And it led me down the path of trying to figure out why is this the case and how we can fix it.
I think I could talk to you all day because I'm a big fan of words and language, and the way you string language together is beautiful. I don't know what paucity means, but the way you're dropping it is amazing. That needs to be my new words. Like what I'm assuming paucity is lack thereof. Is that kind of a lack of? I cannot wait to use that in a sentence. Paucity. Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, speaking of lack thereof, what does that do to like the human psyche when it comes to the psychological and emotional behaviors of people when they don't have green grass near them, when they don't have parks near them, right? When they don't have gardens or ability to access freshness and fresh air? Can you talk to us a little bit about what that does to psyche and behavior and how that can address other dynamics that are happening within communities?
Yeah, so I can answer that question, and I'm going to set up a couple of scenarios to lead into that question. So I'm assuming, you have a broad audience, but I have an affinity preference, identifying as African-American and Afro-Caribbean. I'm always one to look at how does this impact my people? Because I want to protect my parents also. And they don't have access to this information, nor, sometimes the time to even engage and get this information. So I take a responsibility to make sure that this can be accessible to folks. So when we look at what is currently happening in the environment in communities in which people of color live, they're impacted, one, by air pollution. Air pollution, I mean, a Black person is 34 times more likely to currently live in an area that has the highest projected increase sort of for asthma diagnosis and childhood asthma due to air pollution. When we look at extreme labor and the extreme temperature and the impact that has on communities, just before we were talking about, this extreme flooding scenario in New York City, we were talking about extreme heat and how extreme heat is going to impact folks. This was just a couple of weeks ago. And now we're talking about flooding. When we talk about flooding, we're not only just talking about heavy downpours, we're talking about coastal inundation, we're talking about storm surge. And then the impact that has on property and also the ability for people to engage in the economy. So when I look at it holistically, people of color are living in communities that are adversely and also disproportionately impacted by some of the societal ills that stem from climate change and environmental externalities. And essentially it prohibits our ability to live a stress-free life. And by stress-free life, I mean, you need to, in order to be productive in society, you need freedom from disease, you need adequate shelter, you need clean water, you need clean air, and you also need, generally, I'm missing one thing, good shelter. People of color generally sometimes live in communities where shelter is not adequate enough to par. If I give you just an example of Baltimore City, the homes that people tend to rent and live in are riddled with lead-based paint. If I think about the issue with Flint and the water issue, lead in water, lack of access to clean water. So you have lack of shelter, lack of access to clean water. Air pollution. A majority of air pollution is emitted in communities of color, disproportionately so compared to white communities. So you're talking about putting folks in a community, one, that lacks clean air, clean water, adequate shelter, and also lack of access to nature. And nature has been shown, and access to nature has been shown to actually reduce stress. It reduces anxiety. It helps, folks feel a little bit better, and it provides for reprieve. And also that access to nature and tree coverage actually reduces extreme heat. So people living in those communities that don't have tree cover are actually living in areas that are extremely hot, way hotter than communities that have tree cover. So you're putting folks in this constant cycle throughout the entirety of the year, in which they're experiencing some traumatic event due to the environment that they are living in, and they're expected to operate at even a higher caliber compared to others. So
I want to go in the area where you're talking about stress and high stress and anxiety and mental health. I made a hypothesis. It wasn't scientifically backed, but now that I have you, the hypothesis I made by discussing inequities of trees, because in particular, there's a section in LA called Los Felix that, is a more well-to-do neighborhood. And they have these beautiful trees that come together into the center of the median and give so much shade and coverage. But then you drive down the same street that takes you from Los Felix down to South Central Los Angeles, and you see nothing. There's no trees. There's like 0.5% shade within that area. And these are communities that have to possibly use public transportation to go to work, have to sit outside for a bus stop. So they're going from a hot home, because Los Angeles doesn't typically have central air or air conditioning, because why? Until climate change, now they need it. But this going from a hot home essentially to walking down a hot street where there's no shade while they stand outside and wait for the bus. And I think that causes irritableness and uncomfort. And I associate that to violence and crime as partly. Is there any connectivity to that? Do you see from a scientific or data analysis, or is there some way that my hypothesis could be correct, but maybe not backed yet by data? I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, Mike, I'm not deeply versed in that area, but I will say that epidemiological studies have shown that crime tends to rise in warmer months. That may have been sort of like a dated statistic, but in terms of whether it has, something to do with folks' temperament and their ability to manage additional low level stressors, I'm sure it's worth investigating. And you mentioned Los Angeles. Yes, that is definitely an issue in Los Angeles. It brings to mind like the Bassett Avocado community right now, which is completely surrounded by highways and has a paucity of tree coverage. There is literally, lack of access to resources in that area, and that community is definitely taking on a disproportionate burden when it comes to air pollution issues as a whole.
So now, Dr. Upperman, I want to move forward. And one, I think there's a there. So I'm so glad that you were able to cite the epidemiology study about that correlation to heat, because I do believe that is something. When you are hot, you are uncomfortable, right? And when you're hot and you're comfortable and you are already dealing with difficult life challenges already, like independent of heat, I think that only exasperates emotions and exasperates senses and triggers people in just different ways. And so thank you for sharing that. I want to move on because you mentioned, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, not to belabor the point, but I can give you a there that I do know about when it comes to extreme heat. What it does have an impact on people's ability to manage their chronic conditions. So if you live in a neighborhood and your neighborhood has higher than average extreme heat events than usual, and you either have hypertension or you're diabetic, generally what happens is that your ability loses your body loses its ability to thermoregulate, in essence. So your ability to manage and your drugs to manage your chronic condition goes out of whack. And oftentimes that's why we see there being, high incidence of death and also hospital visits for folks who have these chronic conditions during extreme heat events as a whole. There's a lot.
You are welcome back on the Mike Muse Show anytime. Ladies and gentlemen, this is her first appearance on the Mike Muse Show. I'm already officially deeming her the environmental expert on the show. So you're back every week, I think. Upperman. I want to go forward now because you mentioned the avocados and the farming and disposity. Disposity? Did I say it right? Disposity? No. What was that word you used?
Oh, paucity.
Paucity. You talk.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get it right, folks. Audience, you know I love trying things. So paucity.
Uh-huh.
You talk about the paucity of shade with the avocado farm. I want to talk about farming and agriculture and how the climate has changed the farming agriculture, because Dr. Upperman, as you know, and I've been talking to my audience about, so they're very up to date too as well, partly why we had the migration patterns going from Central America up to the border of Texas, and why we had that concern, because of the fact that those individuals living in Guatemala and other countries in Central America, the farming conditions changed with climate change. There's no jobs for them. So that's in part why they were traveling north, because of the climate patterns that's changing farming. Can you give some context to that? Am I right when it comes to that? And can you just expound on how climate is affecting farming and agriculture, and how that can have an impact in some of our southern states and some of our farming states like Iowa and Idaho?
Yeah, definitely, Mike. That's a really, really astute observation that you've teased out for sure. You know, climate stressors definitely do impact migration. And this is what we consider folks who are climate migrants. The sad thing about it is that, you know, climate stressors have been shown to, like, you know, have a role somewhat in the Syria uprising that happened, bringing it back to our hemisphere. And, you know, what we're seeing, yes, across Latin America, Latin America, Central America, there has been, you know, climate impacts that have essentially forced people to try and find other ways to make means. And therefore they choose to migrate to locations that may be provide a better quality of life for them. What we've seen in terms of, you know, seasonality here in the United States and North America as a whole, and I say seasonality because it's all tied when you think about plants. Seasons have changed. More so, the spring season is starting sooner, lasting longer. But we also see that there's this shift that's happening where things are getting warmer as you go further north. So crops that you once were able to only grow in Florida, eventually you may be able to grow in Maryland, depending on the northern progression. This is a huge issue. I mean, for the wine drinkers out there, this is a huge issue for wine regions. We're talking about wine regions in California and also across Europe, France, the Bordeaux region. They're all really, they've been trying to address this issue of climate change and the impact climate change is having on their particular crops for a very long time. And, you know, now our food system is now trying to catch up. It is a problem. It's a problem in terms of where water ends up. First of all, I worked on the Maryland's first climate and health profile.
Wait, Dr. Everett, I want to go back to that because I'm a wine drinker. This is Labor Day weekend. I'm sure we're gonna be popping rosé and all the other things. Give a little bit deeper context, because again, this is why I want to have a conversation with you, because we've always framed climate change as polar bears and green straws, right? But it's about my rosé. How is my rosé on Labor Day weekend being impacted by climate change?
Well, you know, your rosé may not be the same going forward, depending. You know, wineries need very stable conditions to be able to predict and make sure that the grapes that are grown are actually harvestable for the purpose of wine. So minute changes in temperature, air acidity, you know, wind patterns, how much rainfall actually impacts the quality of a grape that's used to make wine. And in essence, you can't control the climate, but we have been, you know, these folks have been producing wine in areas that have had very stable weather patterns for a very long period of time. And that's no longer the case now.
Man, y'all better start recycling, because I do not want my rosé impacted or messed up on my holiday weekend. So y'all get yourselves together. I'm learning too, folks. So I'm gonna do better with recycling too as well. This is a petty moment. First of all, can you work with the government, whoever that works with, that puts all those canisters in cafeterias? There's like 4 different canisters to throw away your trash in. Like, it's landfill, it's compost, it's plastic, it's metal. It's too much. So I end up just throwing it all in one container. I know that's bad. I'm gonna be real with you. Can you just fix that nationally, because it's too many to choose from? Just make it more succinct. Petty moment.
I agree with you, Mike. I support
petty moment.
That. And I think
petty moment.
Yes. Well, the human mind, we're creatures of comfort. We've been taught to change. It takes a little bit of exercise, and I think we just need to make things automatic for folks for it to be successful.
I love that. And In conclusion, I brought you on to talk about Ida, but I thought it was important for us to give context more because it's more than just about the rainfall. It's more than just about, being drowned out and, being stuck on the highway. It's just so much bigger than that. So I wanted for you to kind of set the foundation to really talk about the patterns and changes and all the things you just mentioned. So thank you. That's what I wanted. But Ida, why do you think Ida? I mean, obviously we're used to seeing the hurricanes, in the Gulf Coast, right? That's just a part of where they live and the climate and the oceans and, all that. But we're seeing it now impacted, the Northeast, very harshly.
Mhm.
Like, why is that? Why are we now experiencing the remnants of hurricanes now in this way?
So I'll definitely answer that, Mike. I had an internship in Louisiana the summer that Hurricane Katrina hit. Hurricane Katrina hit 2 weeks after I left Louisiana. That was in New Orleans. And that really had an impact on me because there are a bunch of people that I knew there. I have a great aunt who lives there, who currently is in a nursing home there. But I also grew up in the Caribbean that's known for hurricanes. But one of the benefits of the island that I grew up on was that it was outside of the hurricane belt. That is no longer the case. So it's happening in the Caribbean where islands that were outside of the hurricane belt are now have a high probability of being struck by a hurricane. And now it's a thing for the East Coast of the United States. And I say, why this happened? This actually happened because we're warming the atmosphere. And as temperature rises, more water evaporates. That's just simple. You boil it, it evaporates into the air. And what that happens is that pretty much storm systems are going to have more water. And essentially that water can fall to the ground sometime in a very short period of time. It's just simply, and that's what's happening. We're warming the atmosphere. It's causing more evaporation and strengthening storms. And that water is just downpouring. Now, I mean, I don't have to regurgitate the experience. I mean, Central Park had 7.1 inches of rainfall. It was like the fifth wettest day on record. The same thing for Newark, New Jersey. They had 8.4 inches. That's like rainfall that you see once every 200 to 500 years. Now, take that in, 200 to 500 years. That's what we're experiencing often and frequent. So I have to say that, where our minds as human beings aren't prepared to address or think about the enormity of these issues. Like, for instance, if you woke up this morning and the sun didn't shine, would you be able to solve that?
No.
No. And that's what we're addressing here. That's what the magnitude of the issue that we're addressing here. We're just
that goes into my next question that I have for you then is, and it's a big question. I want to be mindful because it's a big question because I don't even know how to ask the question just because I've never been paying attention to climate until I received all that downpour a couple of days ago. I'm like, oh shit, climate change is here. What do we do? So how do we not how do we solve for it, but what actions do you think, not just we as citizens, but like what should we do from a government perspective, from an industry perspective, and then from a community perspective in order to address these adverse events that are becoming the norm?
Okay. Well, it sounds like a hard question, and a lot of people have put their heads together on this. A lot of science has gone into this. Government, we need to start beginning to assess where the best places for development overall. We're going to have to relocate folks and relocate communities. The way of doing development in the past is gone. We have a new norm that we have to address. We have to figure out how we can best mitigate and adapt to climate change. And that is, in essence, what needs to happen. But we then need to also fully fund the science and also to make sure that people are getting access to credible information to inform their decisions, because we know that no one system works in and of itself. Like the government is not going to act unless the people engage and force and call for the government to act a certain way, to do certain things. So we need our populations to actually like just tap into whatever lay information, say, I'm concerned about this, vote, show up. You know, you put elected officials in position for a reason, and, you know, send them notes here and there and let them know that this is of importance to you. But from an individual level, you know, we definitely can do a bit of things here and there, you know, recycle, as I said, you know, if you own your own house and you probably can afford solar panels, put those in, you know, try to reduce waste, try to recycle, try to spend less on merchandise. I know that that's not, you know, the typical American way we like to buy. If you're in the market for a vehicle, try to, you know, utilize a hybrid or electric vehicle if it's accessible and affordable to you. But one of the best solutions that people won't tell you this, sometimes keeping your old car is the most environmentally sound thing that you can do rather than buying a new car.
Wow. Tell me why. That's an interesting note.
It goes into the whole context of, you know, you're essentially not going into you're not going into the market and buying and encouraging manufacturing of a new piece.
Got it.
Tool.
So you're changing the supply and demand with this gas emissions and all that. Okay.
But yes, old vehicles do have, you know, emissions. They're using dirty fuel, fossil fuel. You want to get away from fossil fuels, but sometimes that could be the best decision, especially for folks who live in cities. And if you live in a city, you probably shouldn't own a car. Public transportation is widely available. And I know this sounds crazy to say after the fiasco of the past couple of days. A lot of people were stranded, but, you know, tap into your National Weather Service, tap into like your local alerts, and make sure that you're aware and act accordingly. You know, don't go out to dinner if there's a tornado warning. You know, got to get out with friends, but you got to protect yourselves and your livelihoods too.
So, I mean, Dr. Upperman, you mentioned something in the audience. I was having a conversation with some friends recently. Like, you know, here in New York, I'm sure everywhere where you live to, where you're listening to this conversation at, we get those emergency alerts on our phones. I never pay attention to them. Like, I just don't. I find them annoying. Flash flood, I find that annoying. I'm like, I'm good. Nothing's ever going to happen in my area. I don't see any flash flooding ever until a couple of days ago. And so as a result of a couple of days ago, I literally said, I'm going to make more of a, whenever I get that alert, I'm going to pay attention, and I'm not going to get out of my house because I don't want to take that chance anymore, because no place is safe anymore, right? You can't say this isn't going to happen here, because just as you said, Dr. Upperman, this event was the first time in like 500 years of these type of occurrences are happening. With that being said, I keep saying this is the last one, but I promise you this is the last question. Audience, I think this is a good one because, you know, it goes to my love of Starbucks. These plastic straws. I hate when I go to a Starbucks and they're trying to be so environmentally conscious. They give me this paper straw. I hate it. I literally hate it, and I'm annoyed. I also hate when I go to like these restaurants and I get things to go and they give me a plastic cup, but then you give me a paper straw. I hate that as well, because I know I'm saying hate on a Sunday, which is probably against biblical things. I don't know. Judge me all you want. You probably judge me right now with this plastic paper straw thing. But I love carbonated drinks like club soda, sparkling water. And so when you drink that out of a paper straw, it changes the consistency. Is my plastic straws really the cause of Ida causing havoc in New York City? Like, can we pick something else? Like, help me, Dr. Upperman. It's not just about Starbucks. I don't want to get you in trouble. It's not just about Starbucks, but it's just about the idea of going from plastic to paper. I'm annoyed. Sorry.
Mike, do you need a straw to drink?
Yes. I knew you were going to say that. Yes. Yes, I do. And I'm not carrying around a metal straw in my pocket every day. I'm not doing that. I live in New York City. I don't want to carry... I don't have a bag. I don't want to carry a bag every day just for a straw.
I'm ordering one for you right now.
So you support this paper straw thing?
I support behavior changes.
You're no longer invited on the show. You're no longer invited. I'm disinviting you on my show. You weren't supposed to say that. Audience, I need you to hit me up at I am Mike Muse, MUSSME, and let me know you stand with me. Like, don't touch my plastic straw, period.
Right. Let's see. Let us know how you feel, people.
Dang, I knew you were going to say that. You're so true to form.
It's all out of love. All out of love. All out of love.
But can you work on developing a new straw that is a hybrid of like, it's not paper, but won't mess with the environment because it's plastic? We just need a different hybrid. Paper ain't it, my friend. Paper is not it.
That's okay.
Okay, well, talk to your people with that, please.
I will. I'll
for
send
me.
the word back.
For me, just for me.
And a lot of people, it'll make a lot of people happy.
It will. Dr. Upperman, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your brilliance. You are literally smart. It's so funny when you bring your friends to work, folks. This is the equivalency of me bringing my friend to work and like, God damn, did she before? You know what I mean? Like, you're brilliant. I see why Chris married you. He would have been a fool not to.
I'm the lucky one, to be honest.
No, he is. So stop that. Humble up. With that, folks, stay right there. We are coming back. Now we're going to lighten it up. It's Labor Day. It's party time. Let's talk about Rick James. So coming up next is Rick James' daughter. Talk about the legacy of Rick James. And also, too, let's catch his documentary. It's on Showtime right now, running this weekend. I've already seen it. Got a little sneak peek. It's amazing. Rick James' life is wild. As you know, someone try and get the scoop. No, you know what? As Drake just said on that last album on 7 a.m., he said Earl Grey versus tea. So I'm going to try and get the Earl Grey from her. Let's go. Stay right there, folks. Be right back.